Welcome to the Mothers on the Frontline podcast. Mothers on the Frontline is a nonprofit organization founded and run by mothers of children with mental health conditions to promote caregiver healing, caregiver justice, and children's mental health justice through storytelling. Please note that we are sharing our experiences as mothers. Nothing on this podcast should be considered medical or legal advice.
In this episode, we are going to discuss our origin story. Tammy, why don't you start off by introducing yourself?
Well, I'm Tammy Neiden. I am a mother of two sons who are now young adults. I'm also a grandmother of a young boy who is almost 2 in almost a week's time. So I am several other things than a mother, as all mothers are. And that's important to note. In my own case, in terms of my professional life, I'm a professor of philosophy. I teach at a small liberal arts college in the Midwest. I started my career studying early modern philosophy or 17th century philosophy, history of philosophy and science. And I point that out because now my current research has changed because of my journey as a mother of a child with mental health conditions. I had been very active in the international community doing conferences and so forth, and had to stop when my son became very ill because it just became impossible to travel. And so I, at that point, really started becoming involved in legislative advocacy around children's mental health and disabilities. And then my husband passed away all of a sudden, and the advocacy that I was doing became impossible to continue in the way I was doing it. I was at the state house quite often, and in my Midwestern state, I was very involved in a way that I really couldn't continue to be. And so at that point, I had to figure out what the heck I'm going to do. I went into survival mode, and I called my besties, which are you two. And that will lead to the next question we'll talk about in a little bit, which is how we met and Mothers in the Frontline. But so that's pretty much my basic story of who I am.
Dion?
Yeah, I will go next. And so I am Dion Benson Smith, a little name tag at the bottom. And I currently live out west. And when I'm thinking about how we met and then how we met, like globally, I think it's really important to acknowledge that for I think both you and I, Angela, the linchpin, like we both had sort of independent relationships with Tammy, and I met Tammy when we were both teaching at we both had we were teaching at the same college. And, I am a mother of a large blended family. So I have 2 stepchildren, and, it's the classic yours, mine, ours scenario. And I met my husband at the same place that I was teaching in the same town, not at the same college. When we were all kind of living in that town together. And as a mother, I think that like my journey into this has been both one of, I was my first child, my firstborn, always was neuroatypical. And that was due to birth complications when I was giving birth. And then when we blended families, we blended and our family got bigger. And my stepchildren, I have several neuroatypical kids. And it's funny because people often assume it's all because, it runs in like hereditary, but it's like both of us, and then we got together, and it's no secret that I'm neuroatypical, so is my husband. So it is a large kind of chaotic and wonderful soup of an environment. But and my profession outside of parenting, because when you blend a family like that, we made a decision that is not unlike a lot of people's decision when we left the Midwest and moved further out west, that I would probably be the primary caregiver, largely because my husband, because he's male, makes a lot more money. He's a male, he's outside of academia. And so this kind of transition space between leaving a profession and my professional training, I'm a political scientist and I study public policy, to a part-time working environment and then more full-time motherhood. It was happening around the same time that Tammy's transition into what the hell, like my thing was, what the hell am I going to do to kind of blend my professional passions and the things that I spent a large part of my life dedicated to studying and doing, and blending it with what I needed to do in terms of caring for this rapidly growing family. So, Angela.
Yeah, I'm Angela Riccio. I am also say West Coast adjacent, and have moved around a bit. Tammy and I have known each other since we were children. We grew up in the same neighborhood, and so that's where our original connection went. So we've known each other 45 years or more. But we've known each other quite a bit. I am obviously also a mother. I have 2 children, also in a blended family. Both of my children are neuroatypical, and through the journey discovered, not surprisingly, so am I. And professionally, I've been working, doing a lot of nonprofit work for a very long time. I've also been a single parent, a working parent, and a stay-at-home parent. And very similar to Dion, when our youngest was born, not too long after, we decided that their needs were such that I would be the stay-at-home parent, and my husband's income was greater than mine at that point. So that was the choice that we made, and I've been that, ever since. And in that journey, I've helped found a Montessori charter school, another advocacy organization, and now been with Mothers on the Frontline for, are we 8 years now that we started this. And through that is how I came to know Dion, which was a wonderful gift. And Tammy being our mutual connection there, we just learned that we've had so very much in common. And I think it's one of the reasons why we also work really well together professionally.
When I think about the stories of how we met, so Angela and I go back to 2nd grade, or actually kindergarten, I think.
No, I think it was 2nd grade.
It was 2nd grade. It was 2nd grade. It was 2nd grade. Yeah, and because Angela and I were the most petite in our classes, we were always at the same end of all the pictures, like at the very first beginning. And perhaps the reason I first loved you, although there have been many more reasons, is you were the one who was even shorter than I. Yes, there are many more reasons now. So, so we really have been friends since then. And we were together in 6th grade, I think, 5th and 6th grade too. something
Yeah,
like
I think it was, yes, all
Yeah.
every other year we were in the
Yeah,
same
it seemed
class.
like it.
Yeah.
And then even when I moved, my family moved when in the middle of my 7th grade year to a nearby town. And then when I was going into 9th grade to a different state, we somehow just always remained in touch over the years. We used to always talk about the movie Beaches, like we related to that, constantly coming back in touch somehow. So that was sort of our story. And I met Dion at our faculty orientation at the college I work at. We both started the same year. And I remember, I don't know if I told you this, Dion, but I think what attracted me to you as a potential friend, like from that first day, is for some reason we were in the one building where, I don't know, I think of as the registrar and so forth. I don't know why we were waiting for something in that meeting, and I overheard you on the phone dealing with the kid stuff. And I was like, okay, this is a woman who will get my situation. And then it ended up that your son was exactly between my 2 sons' ages, and first name and middle name are the first names of my 2 sons. And then there are other weird things. Our mothers have the same first name, and we had the same kitchen towels. I mean, there are all sorts of weird things like, okay, we're just like meant to be.
We're like 20. And
Yeah.
and I'm glad you said that, because that was, I mean, you know, when I started at the college, I was coming off of a really contentious divorce. And so, and I was really starting over fresh for the first time. It was just me and my son. My mother wound up moving out a couple of years later. And so, you know, I was in this small town. I'm starting the first like real job of my second career. So this is, you know, the PhD, and I'm starting my first tenure track position. And I know you never told me that. And I was just like, I don't know how this is going to come up. I have to take these phone calls. It's just me and my child. And town is predominantly, it's not like most college towns are not very diverse. And so, you know, I felt like, not only because when we discovered that like all of the similarities between like the names of your son and my son and the kitchen tiles, I just remember our time together there. Like we worked on a daycare policy. We worked on, like, this was a person who, even though you were married at the time, I felt like you got me in a way that I was not feeling that with other faculty colleagues who also were married and had kids, right? So, and I really appreciated that. That I didn't have to explain, and you know, it made me feel really not only welcome, like our kids getting along, but like I had a true colleague in the fullest sense. And so, you know, how we all got together, if I'm going to spike that up, or throw that up in volleyball terms, and serve it out, was that, you know, we all decided, like, at a certain point in time, we all sort of reached this point in our parenting, right? And you know, if anybody wants to talk about that, I'm going to mute myself because I have this stupid thing giving me a timer. If somebody wants to talk about just sort of the origins of not only how we met, but I think Tammy's a good person to kick that off.
Yeah, I can start it and hand it over to Angela, because I'd like to hear sort of your side of this. But I know Dion and I had been talking about doing we didn't have the name yet, Mothers in the Frontline, but doing something. And I mean, I think part of it too was, and I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, it's really after my husband died that you two met. Is that right?
Yeah. It was, no. We actually met. Funny when you talk about having friends, right?
Yeah.
And doing things. So this is in between.
Yeah.
Husband 1, 2.
Yeah.
We started doing these vacations together, and we went.
Yes. Okay.
I remember because we went, and this is like the
That's
uncanny
before-
thing, because you were living at the time, Angela, in a place that I had lived and worked post college. And so like we went out and you know, we visited with her.
So
And we
now
took the kids on vacation.
this is actually an important part of the story because so when I met Dion, I was married. And then Dion and Angela both got me through a divorce, a painful divorce. And then, even though I was co-parenting with my children's father, I'm still a single mother. You know what I mean? Doing that back and forth on your own. And really, for several of those years, Dion and I, in a way, we co-parented to some extent. We purposely lived across the street from each other. We took care of each other's kids. We vacationed together as a family. I mean, we single parented together.
We were
And all
each other's emergency contact.
and all that time, I'm calling Angela as also my support system.
Yes.
And then we were going on a trip as our blended group here, and then we visited with you. So that is how we all met. That is true. Yeah.
Wow.
Then what happened years later, after my husband passed, one of the things I don't know behind the scenes what was between you two, but you two were both amazing at taking care of me in that following year and coming and spending time with me, you know, after, you know, anyone who's listening to this who has lost somebody, you know, there's like all of the stuff that happens with the funeral and so forth, and people are just so wonderful and they want to be supportive, but it dies down, and that's when the really hard part sets in, and that's when your really good friends are there. And you guys came and both stayed with me for a week and took care of me, and in both of those weeks there's this brainstorming of now what. And at that point, all three of us, for various reasons, have had to redo our entire lives at least once, if not more than once, whether it's divorce, tragedy, what have you. So none of us were new to the idea of we have to redo this whole thing.
Yeah.
And one of the
Yeah, go ahead.
things that I mean, in terms of, and we'll talk about this like when we talk about our journey as mothers on the front line, like the aha moments that came into play. But I also, like, I remember you saying, you know, I have somebody, because I mean, there was a lot that happened in between, you know, us vacationing together. And, you know, you got married, you lost your husband, I changed careers, I got married. And so I think at a certain point, we all kind of lost the snippet of that moment in time, because you said, oh, I have a friend that you need to talk to. And I remember then like you giving me Angela's phone number, because we had been brainstorming, you and I, about like something. It wasn't Mothers on the Front Line, but that was largely because of the conversations when you were really getting at the thick of things with your son around his mental health conditions, and that was when like we were really starting to hit the thick of things with my stepson. And because we were still in the same, there were still geographic crisscross. We were sharing all this, like, don't go to that doctor, and when you go to this doctor, you know, make sure blah blah blah. Oh, I just saw, because you know, there's not a lot of doctors anywhere, and so you're going to kind of meet somewhere in the middle. And that's something that people should really, I encourage people to share information, because the children's mental health community, even in big states, is really tiny. So the number of service providers, particularly service providers who take insurance and everything, it's a handful of people. And so we were like talking, and you were like, oh, you should talk to my friend. And I remember our first conversation, Angela, because it was like, I think we talked for like 3 hours.
Yes.
Like on the first conversation, it was sort of like one of those really serendipitous moments in you don't get them often as adults, where you like talking and you're like, oh my gosh, I really like this person. This person's going to be a friend. Now my telephone battery is about to run out because we've been talking for so long, and we had so many things that were just sort of, that not only were similar, but I just think just, you know, that resonated, right? Like
Yes.
with one another.
No, absolutely. I remember that conversation, and so very often we continue to have 3-hour conversations when we have them and our phones die. We don't get to have conversations as often as we like, but when we do, it is both quality and quantity. And we're always like, oh my gosh, we could still talk for hours and hours. And yeah, the serendipity is a really good way to explain it, like how rare it is to, as an adult, to find a friend who I honestly consider you guys to be, like, lack of a less corny term, soul sisters, right? Like, we get each other at a level other people don't, right? And a lot of it is shared experiences, right? You know, my family is also an interracial blended family. There are things that Dion and I have in common that you would just never look at us and go, oh yeah, those two women, they have that in common. We have so many things, and it's always this wonderful surprise discovery when we talk and we're just like, our families like lived way long ago in the same area in Virginia. Like, this is where like just weird things where, like, we know some ancestors cross paths, and maybe not in a best way, maybe, you know. my family of origin was probably not on the right side of things, you know, let's just say, but it creates a kind of I don't know, synergy, if that's the right word, between us, and a knowing, and we get things. And it also helps me be y'all's Professor Whisperer and understand things that you're saying that other people will be like, what are they talking about? So that is definitely part of my role in this, and part of the importance of our dynamism together.
I think that's, I mean, it's a good spot to talk about why we created Mothers on the Frontline, because I mean, there was the rapport aspect to it, and the healing aspect of being able to talk to people who just get you, but at a very, very profound level, we wanted to. You can't recreate friendship and synergy with friendship and things that you like, but you can recreate, and this is what one of the things that I think we strive for. You can recreate this kind of space where you are surrounded by people who are like you and who get you. And so those conversations and those moments where, you know, you feel just like no one else, you can't be in the full-fledged space of mothering neuroatypical kids who have mental health conditions, and all of its complexities, right? And be authentic, right? And be able to authentically share your frustration, share your anger, share your joy, all of these things, and not feel like somebody is judging you or trying to figure out like where to categorize what you're saying. Like, oh, how does that fit with good mother, bad mother? How does that fit with striving? Where's your story of triumph? And it was so incredibly healing when we were all, and it still is. I mean, we could literally talk about this. I think if we didn't keep ourselves the time, we could fill up at least 8 hour slot. It's not hard because it's still in that really unique space of having not just friends who get you, but who are friends who have similar enough experiences, similar enough knowledge, who can actually help, challenge, listen, and they just see you. Right? That feeling of being seen. And this is why I think at the heart, and y'all can say, like, one of the things at the heart of what we keep trying to do, especially when we're in physical space with other parents and caregivers, is to create an environment where people understand that we see you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that you're safe to be your most vulnerable self, because parenting children, any child, but particularly children who are medically complex, neurodivergent, who have mental illness, it is really, really hard. And there are times where you need to be free to break down, to cry, to admit the mistakes that you're making, admit you don't know what you're doing, to have support, and to have the knowledge of other people who've already been through it or who are going through it to help guide you as best as possible in an impossible situation. And I know that I was able to do that with both of you, and nobody else, right? Because you knew, and I could say the tough things. I could cry my eyes out.
You could be messy.
Messy, so messy, right? And you needed a place to be messy because you're always having to keep it together in front of everybody. Even if, I have some big emotions that, come pouring out in therapy, which is also supposed to be a safe place, but it's not always, right? You are also being judged and critiqued for how you feel about what's happening to your children, right? Do you express things? Do you feel things the right way, right? Do you have the right emotions? And with the both of you, it was a safe space. And we felt that it was so important to take the things that we were learning together as friends and what you guys brought in professionally, right? In ways that has so enhanced what we were trying to figure out, what we were feeling, right? I didn't have the words for it. And you guys helped me develop vocabulary for the things that I was experiencing. And that changed things for me.
I think if I think about the very early parts of our journey, one is, so Dion and I were talking for a long time about similar issues our children were facing. And I remember this phone call very clearly because I was so sad as your friend, but so like, oh, okay, you're in. You had a child who had medical complexity. And so a lot of the issues that Dion and I had been talking about, I had talked to you about in that, because there are a lot of overlaps.
Yeah.
But we wanted to create an organization that was particularly focusing on mental health aspects. And then there was a phone call where you shared with me, now that was part of your reality, which of course was very sad that was part of your reality. But it was also like, oh, do you want to join?
Yeah, I remember.
Yeah. And I remember also in the early days, there were sort of for me, there were two big motivations, because what we are as mothers on the front line and what we do has developed and changed, right? A bit from our early days. But my motivation, as we were really starting to form in that first year, was twofold. One is I had been doing a lot of policy and legislative advocacy for a while, doing a lot of media interviews, a lot of things like that. And it was very frustrating to me that in, the small Midwestern state that I was doing this work in, you would only see the same few families sharing their story all the time, because people don't want to have to share their story and give up the privacy that their family needs and deserves. But media won't cover it unless you do that. And so a big problem I was coming across in advocacy is, how do you get stories out there? Because the narratives that are out there do not match our lived realities. And then the policies don't meet our needs because of that. And so that was like, okay. And so there's an idea that we came up with early on is, well, if we have a podcast where we have mothers interview other mothers, in the kind of way we have conversations with each other, that without and the mother can decide how they want to introduce themselves so they can maintain the privacy they want, people will get a glimpse of these intimate conversations. And at the same time, that motivation, the other motivation was, if people could only hear so many times we'd say, if people could only hear this conversation.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that was sort of the motivation of the podcast, is that, well, what if we facilitate these kind of conversations and people can start hearing them, right? So those are the early days of the podcast. And our original intention was not only for us to interview, but to train people to do the interviews,
Yeah.
which we started to do early on as well.
And
yeah, go ahead.
I think that gets at one of the core parts of our mission, right? And how we move. And I mean, if you go to the website, we still talk about, it still says storytelling, right? So it still has promoting, children's mental health and caregiver healing through storytelling. And it was really the power of, and this gets to where, probably the academic research, and then even, it's like you're researching things and you're like, oh yeah, I have parallels in my life. It's rarely the case. Like, we're researching something, it's like, that's very interesting, but it's not often that we're making these like intimate connections between what we are researching and what we're thinking about and what we're actually experiencing. And this was one of these rare opportunities where I think this kind of met together, because I've been doing all this work, and particularly in Black and women of color feminisms, and really looking at how narrative disruption, right? And so when we're talking about, your frustration, and you were sharing it with me, over having to fit your story, like, in order to do advocacy, and there is this strong, not just movement, but there is this very cookie cutter way that nonprofits and advocacy work with people from the community and approach people like ourselves from the community to share our stories for the purpose of advocacy. And it means that it has to fit a blender that's cookie cutter approach. So you have to have, that's like that narrative of triumph they have. And literally, people will not only discipline, but they will say to people, okay, we're going to cut out this, and like take nuances of who you are and what you've experienced and what you're sharing, and so that it would fit the plot line. And I remember you talking about, you were frustrated with it, you were sick of it, you're like, they're making me into something I'm not. And so I was looking at storytelling internally in terms of groups and communities, and the way in which creating these spaces like we try to create creates a narrative disruption. Like, it's much like what should be happening, what people think in cognitive behavioral therapy, where you talk about your experiences and you talk about it enough and you go through and you're like, you get an aha moment, right? And we were really focused on control and agency, so that somebody tells you what they want you to know. And we talk about this. People will tell you what they think is important to know, and not doing this kind of digging and poking. And how healing that was to, even for me in our early days of programming, it was really transformational. It transformed my teaching, my research, how I work with other doctors, to be in community space and be with spaces, not just with us, but also those early days when we had those first grants to talk to other parents, and actually see the joy, right, of being able, like, what do you want me to say? We want you, like, and really like opening up the space and having people talk and tell you what they wanted you to know. And just having that first conference we went to in Florida, and we first did the podcast, and just that like joy that people had, like, oh my gosh, this is like the most powerful and most profound thing that's happened to me at the conference.
Yeah, just being able to have a space to tell your story in a way that, as you're saying, isn't edited, doesn't have an agenda, isn't looking for a specific conclusion, because your life and your story does not fit a nice little clean storyline, right? It doesn't. And it doesn't help our families and ourselves to be put in this tiny little box of what they think it is to be a mother of children with mental health issues, complex medical issues, neurodivergence, any of those things. It is not that, as we talk about all the time, the TV autism, right? You know, for the children about that, what you see on TV and what you think is the experience of our children and families. That is not it, right? You know, that is not it at all. It is so much more complex. It is so much more beautiful, right, than what you see, and having the space to just be, right, to just be who you are and not worry about what you say is going and how it's going to be judged in the stigmatized ways that it is often judged, is profoundly healing. And that is something that we experience all the time when we're in spaces with parents, with social workers, with doctors, with teachers. In any of those spaces, we continue to learn that what we're doing matters, right?
Yeah, and one of the things that happened in those early the times we were recording for the podcast, we quickly, in our first year, we started also doing public speaking on these issues. So that was something we were doing as well. One of the things that started to happen as we started doing the recordings is recognizing, as you two are describing, there's a kind of sacred space that would occur in the interviews. We have a certain methodology we could probably talk about in a future episode of pre-talk, post-talk, how the interviews would occur. And one of the things that often happened is people would not want to leave. And when they'd leave, they would want to hug you, like people you had never met before. They'd want to hug you. They would cry and thank you for what had happened. And what had happened is a human being listened to them.
Yeah.
Yes.
And it just became so clear how important that is and how rare that is if you're living with a stigmatized experience.
Yes.
For
And
someone,
how isolating that experience is just.
Yeah.
Yes. And that's one of the reasons we do this, right? Is to bring people into community and to remove, that isolation for even just a short period of time. And, one of the things that I would add to what you were saying, Tammy, about being listened to by a human is you're being listened to by a human being who has very similar shared lived experience.
Yes.
It is not the same when somebody who doesn't get it, right? Through no fault of their own, right? It isn't a judgment on somebody else, but there is a different level of connectedness. There's a different level of healing that happens when you are in the same space with people who get it. And you don't have to explain all of the things just in order to get to a place where that person might.
Yeah.
And I like to give a shout out to Patricia Hill Collins.
Oh, please.
Because that was actually the when we talk about, the academic part of like when we were thinking about like, how do we do this? Who do we want to have in community? Who do we want to have in the room? Who do we want to have to do the interviewing? And, this is largely based on influences of her work on my thinking and in Black feminist thought. And when she really talks about Black women are really the only women who can understand to judge the authenticity of experience, of voice, of what is actually being witnessed and what is actually being discussed. If you don't have the experience as a Black woman, and it comes up in my classes all the time, particularly in my graduate classes, because people like, are you saying that like only Black women can work with other Black women? And we could talk about like the intricacies of what that means another time. But at the essence of it is exactly what you're saying, Angela. It's to be with somebody who has that experience and shares that experience. And in those very first days, I remember like going out in the community and doing this work. And one of the things that we would do, or I would do in our little 10-minute blurb, this is pre-pandemic, before the pandemic was I would say my name. I would give like who, I'm with Mothers on the Frontline. I give like a small blurb on a professor, blah, blah, blah. And I'm a parent of a child with a mental health condition. And so just saying that, right? And then people would like, wait. And then that was like sort of how then I'm like, I'm here, I'm doing interviews or whatever. And then people would come in and they would just say, oh my gosh, you know, I've been carrying this like really, really close, especially people of color, right? There's lots of different reasons that even in a medical setting, let me just say all the professionals who are set up to be kind of helping professionals are also people who are part of longstanding professional agencies and they are set in the institutional setting that have done real harm and continue to do real harm in the capacity of their profession, right? So doctors in the capacity of the profession, social workers as a whole, not individual social workers, but in the capacity of that profession have done real harm. And it does not leave a lot of space for people to authentically, like you cannot remove the mask, like what we talked about earlier. And so that was like centrally at that heart. And I just want to like make sure that we you know, lift up how important her work.
It cannot be overstated, because what started to happen in those early days, we were always talking about Black feminist methodology and how we can, because you brought this to it, the work, how the interview was set up, how the methodology, how we even presented the podcasts, and every element of it was really thought about in this kind of way. And another thing Angela said a little bit ago that came later, we came to the work of epistemic injustice, or how people are harmed as nowheres later. And now we both teach it, and now it's a part of our scholarship. But because of this work, because what we were experiencing was people not believing our experiences as mothers, testimonial injustice, people not understanding our experience because it's not accurately represented in the culture, hermeneutical injustice. Or even if we are able to represent it, it wouldn't get uptake because we were not believed or respected as having any expertise on our own experience. And so all of that really goes back to Black feminist thought. And even before that, Du Bois and others, like, who were really thinking about how identity and social experience and social situatedness affects knowledge. So we have such a debt to all of these traditions. The other thing that was happening in our early days, so we were speaking and we were doing workshops to teach storytelling, to give a space for community and so forth. But two things sort of happened. One is what Deanne was just saying. Whenever I'd go give a talk, whenever we'd give a talk together, I think we all experienced this, and individually, people would always come up to me and whisper, oh, me too, this is my experience too. And they had to whisper it. They didn't want anyone else to know. And one of the things we'll talk about in a future episode is that the whisper was the quietest when it was someone who worked in a job setting that focused on helping children with mental health, which I think is important, that's the most stigmatized area for it, is telling. The other thing that happened, and then I'll hand it back to you guys, because I remember specifically, I have a very vivid memory, Angela, of you and I preparing a particular conference talk on, my little patio. Like, we were sitting there, and that was when the discussion of Wisdom Collective came up. And I want to make sure we talk about that, because it's not just about being in community, but we recognized how, because of those epistemic traditions you're just talking about, Deanne, from like Black feminist epistemology or theory of knowledge, things like that, is we're not only in community healing each other in our workshops, us together in the podcast, but what was happening is wisdoms were being shared and created. So if you'd like to talk about Wisdom Collective.
Like that was a really aha like time that we spent together, and it was just one of those epiphanies, right? You're like, we figured out something, right? We were trying to find the words for it and how we could convey it, and realizing how much in sharing what we have learned, we were learning so much from other people, right? And that we didn't want to be the sort of depositor of knowledge, right? Like here we're filling you up with something, right? Like that what we wanted to do would be something that's more sharing and gathering, that the people, the mothers that came to us had as much to gift us, right, with their experience as we had to share in our own experience. And that we wanted it to be something very different than the typical transactional experience, right? Like even in public speaking, like we're out here giving to you, right? And you're just like accepting it, right? Like you're like a vessel that we're depositing coins into or something, right? And that we didn't want it to be that way, that we didn't find that was going to be healing or different, right, Tammy?
Yeah, I think what happened at that moment, and I want to like, this is a good point for Deanna to come back in as well. Angela and I were reflecting on all the stuff we've learned from Dion, but we had also just been reading and discussing Joanne Archibald's work of Indigenous story work. Yeah. And so that was so important for our development of thinking of storytelling as a relational activity. Yes. Because even at that very conference we were presenting at, Angela, there was a and this has happened for me and you, Deanna, at other conferences. Whenever there's like a conference for parents of children with disabilities, there's always like, tell your story, like for advocacy. And they always say, all stories have a beginning, middle, and end. And we'd go, hell no, they don't.
Right. That's right.
Because it's such a colonialist linearity to that, right? Yeah. Like all stories have a beginning, middle, and end. And this is, one of the things that's powerful about Joanne Archibald's work, about Linda Tuai Smith's work on indigenous methodologies, where we're working on a circle, right? And so one of the things that, with the Wisdom Collective, which is it's really good because we work on a metaphor of and you brought this to us, Angela, of a web, right? So all these so it's much more like a spider's web, and not like this beginning, middle, end. Not with this kind of linearity that is actually an imposed idea of time, right? It's colonialistic, it is capitalistic, and it's an imposition on time and movement that is not how we experience things. And we're in time and we're out of time simultaneously, right? And one of the things that for me, it became clear, and this is again how it impacts even how I talk about, I do a lot of work in qualitative social sciences, what's called phenomenological research, and so like interviews in the social sciences. And to me, the Wisdom Collective is sort of a third space. Like what I started to realize is you have first space, which is me, I'm speaking, second space, which is all the people who are kind of coming into the workshop. And then every single time we do a workshop or we bring people together, they're creating something totally new. Yes. And that's sort of this third space. And you can literally feel this third space. And when you brought to us this idea, you're like, oh, it's a web. And then I'm like, oh, so it keeps going and it keeps going. If you pull on one part of it, like any kind of spider's web or anything, it'll resonate in a whole different spot that maybe you could see it, but maybe you didn't know that these things were connected together. And so that's what whenever I'm thinking about our work, I think about our work as this kind of web connections that we're continuously like adding to.
Yeah. And this is also where I would like to give out a shout out to one of my biggest influences too, in Robin Wall Kimmerer in Braiding Sweetgrass, which is a book that I shared with you guys because I was like, you will find me in these pages, right? Like literally crying and being like, oh my gosh, this is how I feel about my experience in the world. And, the influence of gardening, right? And how, for me, when we talk and we give public speaking, gardening metaphors always come up for me, but it's also that idea of that I get from her of the interconnectedness, and that in Wisdom Collectives, it's about reciprocity, right? And not that transactionalness. There is a give and a take, and and it's sacred, right? And there's a responsibility in those spaces, right? What I'm sharing, it has a responsibility to it, right? A more, I feel an ethical responsibility to what I share, right? And that when I'm in those spaces, I'm also open to receiving, right? Without judgment, right? That's a really big part of it, right? Just allow a person to share whatever it is that they have to share in that moment, right? And accept it for what it is, and it's gifts, and they're interconnected, and the longer you're in those spaces, the more of those threads you're like, wow, I had no idea that we could bring those 2 things or 10 things together.
And it's kind of got this, I like the level of seemingly haphazardness of it, right? Like it's not always us bringing it together. And this gets back to the early work and the podcast. And I know, I think we're running out of time. We're probably going to have to talk about like where we move to at another point. But one of the things that was really, that has been the sort of central element that to keep the web is weaving through is the way in which what we do, and here's another metaphor that we use, is planting seeds, right? So we don't know how what we're doing or what we're saying will resonate with another person, right? We are kind of leading up to some magic when we're in space together, and definitely kind of spreading this out when we are doing podcasts. And to me, that's a really important difference, right? So when you're doing the storytelling for advocacy, you're really always trying to position a message so that it lands, and that is a preconceived audience that you're trying to think about, and like, well, you can't say this, or we won't say something else because it's not going to land. And it was positively freeing, right? And you're right, braiding sweetgrass. I still, like, I assign sections of that for my classes now, was a really important way of thinking about community, thinking about reciprocity, and thinking about all the things that we were doing. That kind of, for me, it was the thing that got us off of the linearity of it all. First, third, and that kind of constant beat.
Yeah, just to tie this to language that you'll be hearing in other of our podcasts or on our content online, is that we, throughout our work, really contrast reporting, whether it's the reporting you're made to do to your child's doctors, teachers, social workers, caseworkers, what have you, versus story, or when you're being interviewed, like as an advocate, which I'd often done by media, versus, and how extractive and transactional that is, versus storytelling, which is relational. And that's really what I'm hearing you two speak about, that relationality. And so that's something I just want to point out. That was one of the things we're trying to do, is to really bring out in our workshops and our podcasts and so on. I mean, one of the things, we are running out of time. I mean, I guess we could just say then the pandemic happened, but more than that, I mean, what really had happened for myself personally, my life blew up in 2019, sort of, in a way that I'll probably talk about in a certain podcast, in that I had to start homeschooling my son and things like that. Actually 2018, 2019, and then the pandemic hit. And then it was just really hard because we all lost all services for our children and we're in survival mode. But a great thing happened at that time too for us, and that we realized just us talking together could be valuable. And so while we still have quite an archive of unprocessed interviews that I still am trying to work on to get up and out. So if you listen to the podcast and all of a sudden there's like a 2019 recording and you're like, what? That's why. That's okay. That's how we roll. We do things so we can help. But I think what's happened now is we've gone to more of an appreciation of the value of what we have been doing all along at a meta level. And so we're all doing much more writing and putting together curriculum. Right. So I don't know if you guys want to speak about that really quickly before we go, but yeah, the overwhelm of the pandemic really made us sit back and say, what do we have the capacity to do? What are others doing that we maybe don't have to focus on? What are we positioned to do that's special? Yeah.
I think that yeah, the overwhelm and the pause. I mean, you know, I'm not gonna like not to humble brag, but we were like very early early adopters, yeah, of podcasting. So like I remember you went to the like that podcast conference in Philadelphia, and it was like Terry Gross. There's a whole bunch of NPR people. And so podcasting, like the whole like landscape of how people interact and the way that people interact has completely changed as generations of people have started to move into interacting, as the platforms move and change. It's become a lot less formal and a lot less like what we were doing. Even the people we were talking to are like, what am I supposed to say? I really think that if you ask people to be on your podcast now, it's like asking, like, you know, can somebody go and be on, you know, can you come over and be on my, remember when we were younger, they had the little like school radio programs and like, I'm going to interview you. And people always say, are you like, everybody's walking around with, I'm going to age myself, with the VHS cameras. And at first people were like, what do I say? And then it got to the point that everyone's like pranking in front of it. That's where I see podcasting. But when we started, it was a lot of, it was a bigger lift, right? And we had to actually, we were also working to help educate the people that we were talking to about what exactly is this podcast thing, what we're going to do with it, how we're going to handle voice and all of these other things, like not voice like how they're talking, but voice in terms of how, what we're going to edit and where they're going to appear, because it was novel. And so the pandemic happened. And I think with that, there's new technologies, there's new opportunities. And for us, this has gotten a lot more relaxed. This whole format is much more accessible. I mean, you know, the third graders are doing podcasts, and that is technology has made it more accessible, but people also are much more primed. And we would have had to do, I think, what we did during the pandemic. Had the pandemic not happened, I think we would have hit a natural climax point where we would have had to look at how we were doing our community outreach, but how we were doing this format anyway. It just so happened it was a horrible opportunity for us to slow down and hit pause.
Because we were just doing so many workshops up to that point. So I want to say one thing about editing that you mentioned, because I think that's really important, and probably where we were at an interesting point there is when we started, people were delivering polished, as you were saying, polished podcasts. And what we did differently is we wouldn't edit because we didn't want to edit anyone's voice. We had a very clear criterion for what we would and wouldn't edit. And we spoke to everyone about this before the recording. So they knew that we edited out for sound. And Deanne, I'm going to pick on you, even though we all got into, I know she's rolling her eyes, you can't see her. We all finally learned, take off the jewelry, you know, take your hands off the table. But when we all get excited, we start moving around, and I'm the one who did the audio editing, and she would hit the table when she got excited. I'm like, the headphones in my ears are, you know, so bad. But we would only edit out, like, so our listeners didn't have the sore ear because one of us got excited and hit the table because the microphone was sitting on the table back then, or what have you. We'd edit out like if a car beeps in the distance, like those kind of things, which now seem funny to us because no one edits those out anymore. But back then we thought, oh, we have to do that. We didn't edit out anyone's story unless it endangered their safety. And there was a couple times we had to do that, where we had to just basically take out the name of a service they use or so forth, because it could have put them in danger because they had suffered abuse, and it could give them a location of their family or something like that. So,
And we also asked them if there was anything that they wanted to, you know, like if they said anything and the post, like, can you write down, I said this, but I don't want this in. And you're right. And it's so much closer to what people do now. Where almost nothing is edited out. And, you know, it's like people are like talking in the microphone as they're like walking through the store. to and then putting it up, and that's the technology accessibility. So I just want to say, like, the changes that we made, and even it may even sound dated as we get the backlog up. It's like it's so much more formal in the lack of formality than even what exists now. And so
well, and I think I want to point out an important difference that I noticed in what you're talking about. Lots of people now have the, like you said, they have the microphone, they're sitting in their car, they're walking around, they are telling their story.
Yeah.
Still different than telling your story to somebody else in an interview, right? Right. Yeah. Where that is still more formal. There's still kind of, I don't know if an agenda is the right word for it, but what we did was allow a person to just tell their story completely, right? There was no, again, beginning, middle, end in that. It was whatever they wanted. When we did the transcript, we didn't change their language. Well, colloquialisms, all of that things, accents, which when we sent away to translation services, they would change what people said. Right. And that was one thing that I was finding when we were doing that. I was like, oh my gosh, we can't have that in there. Like that's how important to us having somebody's story told unedited, right? Exactly as they told it. And I still think that that's incredibly important, right? That we aren't changing it to make it sound more palatable, to improve their English or their grammar or, any of those sorts of things, that we are allowing it to always be its authentic self, right?
Yeah.
And so we can.
And then the pandemic happened. How's about that?
How do
we go? And that, I think that's like a good point to like, okay, then the pandemic happened, and we are, and some changes, which we could talk about at another point, like some of the changes. Some of the things didn't change. We just changed the way in which we do it. But I think the underlying sentiment and the foundations of how we do it and why we do it, I don't think has really changed.
No. And a future conversation can also be how this has also very much informed our scholarship, Dan. So it's like our scholarship has informed this work, but this has just as much, if not even more, affected what we write on, what we speak on at academic conferences,
how I teach
has
fundamentally changed because of this work.
Yeah. So we do probably have to end here, but
Speaking of homeschool, I have to go.
That's right.
we all have to go today. And as always, it's so wonderful having these conversations with you. And I wanted to leave one final thought. And it's something that we have on our webpage, that words are medicine, right? And they can either heal or harm. And that's really important to us.
Yes.
So,
thanks.
You're welcome. Bye, ladies.
You have been listening to the Mothers on the Frontline podcast, copyrighted in 2024 by Mothers on the Frontline. Today's podcast hosts are Deanne Benson-Smith, Tammy Neiden, and Angela Riccio. The music is Old English, written, performed, and recorded by Flame Emoji. For more information on our Children's Mental Health Justice Framework, or to support our work with a tax-deductible donation, go to mothersonthefrontline.org. To listen to more episodes, subscribe to the Mothers on the Frontline podcast anywhere you listen to podcasts.